It's been about a month since I last spoke about the Great Tribulation. So, in case you forgot, let's do a review really quick. We started in this chapter at verse 15. This verse told us how to know that someone will be in a great tribulation. Jesus said that the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel, would stand in the holy place. We looked at Daniel. This is to say that who we call the Antichrist, he would set up an image of himself inside the temple. That's the start, or that's how you know you will be in the Great Tribulation, when you see that happen. Then he went on to say, down in verse 21, for then shall be great tribulation. And if you want to know how the tribulation will be, verse 21 says, nothing was like it since the beginning of the world, and nothing will ever be like it. No event in history can be equal to how bad it will be at this time. Verse 22, except those days should be shortened, no flesh should be saved, but for the elect's sake those days should be shortened. If those days weren't shortened, then everybody would die, basically. Verse 23 down to verse 28 basically talks about general things that will be happening during the Great Tribulation. It says there will be false Christs, there will be false prophets, and these people will be deceiving people by doing signs and wonders. So great are signs and wonders that if it was possible, they will deceive the very elect. That's verse 24. So I wanted to start today in verse 29. Now this is titled Signs in the Heavens. So verse 29 basically begins to talk about after the tribulation. Jesus is not very detailed in this chapter about the tribulation. He's very general. He just talks about general things to look for. Yes, you can get very detailed other places in the Bible about the tribulation. I will return to it in other places, but I want to go through this chapter first. So, in verse 29, he talks about what will happen, what things will happen that directly lead up to his coming. And people say that they know the date of his coming and so forth. It's not a mystery. I don't mean the date, please, but it's not a mystery of when he will come, because he says what things will happen right before I come. So verse 29, he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Now you got to understand, if you really read this chapter, Jesus is talking in order. So please notice verse 9, he says, then. Verse 10, and then. Verse 14, at the end of the verse, and then. Verse 16, then. Verse 21, for then. Verse 23, then. Verse 29, after the tribulation. Verse 30, he says, and then. So he's talking about events that's going to happen in order. So right after the tribulation, he says, immediately, there are going to be signs in the heavens. This same conversation, this same event is recorded in Mark and Luke also. In Luke chapter 21, it says that. It says, there shall be signs in the heavens. But it doesn't say exactly what it shall be. Matthew says that the sun will go dark, the moon will not shine, and the stars will fall from heaven. In Luke, it just says that there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. I was reading some commentaries as part of my study, and I really couldn't believe what they were saying. They were saying that this verse is not literal. This verse is figurative. I really don't understand how somebody could read this verse and think it's figurative. Because it lumps stars, moon, and sun together. And it talks about they shall fall from heaven. I don't understand how you can take that figuratively. They were saying that the sun represents kings here on earth. When Jesus comes, kings shall fall. I don't get it. That's dumb to me. But anyway, please take this literal. It's literal. Please take it literal. And also, if you're a reader, you might run into some scientists who may give their opinion. They will say also that this is not possible. Because how can a star fall? Where will it go? Blah, blah, blah. The Bible is true. And science has to bend to the Bible. The Bible doesn't have to bend to science. Just believe that this is literal and this will literally happen. Now, I have a curious mind when I study. So I'm thinking to myself, the disciples must be wide-eyed right now. Their eyes must be huge, listening to what he's saying. The sun will be dark. The moon will not shine. I don't think this is surprising to them because they are Jews. This is routine for them to be in the temple. And it's routine for them to have scripture read to them in the temple. It's a good illustration of that in Luke chapter 4. Jesus stands and reads from Isaiah. This would be routine for the disciples. Go in the temple and have somebody read from the Old Testament. And at this time, all they had was the Old Testament. So they would know the Old Testament. This is Old Testament talk, what Jesus is saying. This is Old Testament talk. So let me show you. In Amos, this is Amos chapter 5. It's up here. This is verses 18 through 20. It says, the Old Testament calls when Jesus comes back the day of the Lord. So verse 18 says, woe to you that desire the day of the Lord. To what end is it for you? The day of the Lord is darkness and not light. Remember that because he said in Matthew that the sun will go out, the moon will not shine. The universe is going to be dark at this time. Verse 19. As if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him, or went into the house and leaned his hand on the wall and a serpent bit him. Shall not the day of the Lord be darkness and not light, even very dark and no brightness in it? This is Zephaniah chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. The great day of the Lord is near. It is near, and hasteth greatly, even the voice of the day of the Lord. The mighty man shall cry there bitterly. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. This is hard for us to fathom, but right immediately after the tribulation, these things are going to happen in the heavens, and the whole universe is going to be dark, pitch black. Now, to further bring this out, you can turn here if you want, you don't have to, but let's look at Luke's account of it. This is Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21, verse 25 and 26. There shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Now we have to understand some of these words here, they're important. Verse 25, we went over the signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. Then he says, On the earth, distress of nations. Distress in the Greek means anxiety. So while this stuff is happening in the heavens, on the earth there's going to be anxiety in all nations. All people are going to be very anxious. It says with perplexity. Perplexity in the Greek is the word aporia. So very, you need to understand that word, aporia. That word means to be at a loss for a way, or as we would say, to be at one's wit's end. So people on the earth, when this happens in the sun, moon, and stars, people on the earth are going to be at a loss for what to do. They're going to kind of be going crazy. They're at their wit's end. They don't know what to do, what's going on. It says, the sea and the waves roaring. The word roaring in the Greek is the word ekeos, it's the English word echo. So the sea and the waves are going to be very loud at this time, very noisy. Probably because they're going to be crashing out of control. Then verse 26 says, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. The word failing means to breathe out or expire. This is to say, men will be dying because of fear at this time. People will literally be scared to death. Why will their hearts be failing them for fear? For fear, one, and for two, because of what things are happening. People are going to be scared to death. They're not going to know what to do. This is also Old Testament talk. This is not surprising to the disciples. Isaiah chapter 13. This is verses 6 through 10. It says, howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Therefore shall all hands be faint, and every man's heart shall melt. Sounds like Matt, sounds like Luke. And they shall be afraid. Pangs and sorrows shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travails. They shall be amazed one at another. Their faces shall be as flames. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate. And he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. I don't have these verses up here, but I'm going to read them. This is Isaiah chapter 13, verses 11 through 13. Just listen. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. And I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a man more precious than fine gold. That word precious is not as we think of it. That word precious means rare. I will make a man more rare than fine gold, even a man than the golden wedge of Ophir. Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. When Jesus comes back, it's not going to be nothing nice. It's not going to be anything nice. He says in verse 13 that he will remove the earth from her place. That's a lot to think about, because if the earth, this is just in scientific terms, if the earth moved at all from its place as we know it now, there is no more gravity for us. We would just be floating. So the next time somebody gets arrogant and says that they know when Jesus is coming back, they yell out a date. you know the truth. Just say, no, because the sun is still shining. The moon is still shining. He's not come back yet. We know that those things have to happen right before he's coming. So the next time, I'll talk about Jesus, his return.
Amen.
Amen.